No dogs allowed in the exhibit hall. Service animal or not, it's far too crowded today. And frankly, museum policy is policy. You'll have to leave him outside, or both of you will have to leave. The clipped, cold words sliced through the quiet. Reverence of the museum lobby. Arthur Jenkins, a man whose 70-odd years were etched into the lines on his face like a roadmap of forgotten battles, flinched. His hand instinctively went to the worn harness of Shadow. The black Labrador retriever pressed faithfully against his leg. Shadow, sensing his master's distress, let out a soft whine. His intelligent brown eyes fixed on the uniformed young guard. Arthur's gaze, clouded with weary sorrow, drifted toward the grand archway leading to the valor and sacrifice. Voices of the Great War. Exhibit. He had waited months for this day, for this exhibit. He's a certified service animal, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper, raspy with disuse and the weight of unspoken memories. He helps with my balance in crowds. The guard, no older than 25, puffed his chest out. His name tag read, Mark Security Officer, gleaming under the recessed lighting. Sir, I understand, but rules are rules. We can't make exceptions. It's a liability. Now please. Mark gestured dismissively toward the exit. The sting of dismissal, so familiar yet always sharp, settled heavily in Arthur's chest. He looked down at Shadow, then back at the seemingly impossible distance to the exhibit. If this story touches a nerve, if you believe dignity should never be dismissed, type honor in the comments below. Arthur Jenkins was a man of quiet habits and even quieter suffering. His small, sparsely furnished apartment on the city's forgotten fringe was a testament to a life lived without fanfare. Mornings began before dawn, a habit ingrained from decades past, followed by a slow, deliberate walk with Shadow through the gray urban landscape. His threadbare tweed coat, a relic from a thrift store, offered little warmth against the biting November wind, but Arthur wore it like a second skin. Its familiarity was a small comfort. Neighbors saw him as just another elderly man, slightly stooped, his gait uneven, always accompanied by his loyal dog. Few knew, or perhaps none remembered, that the slight limp was a souvenir from a place called Hill 734, a name that resonated only in the fading memories of a handful of survivors and the dusty archives of military history. He had served, yes, served, in a way that had carved pieces from his soul, leaving behind scars both visible and unseen. Shadow, with his calm presence and unwavering loyalty, was more than a service animal. He was an anchor tethering Arthur to the present when the ghosts of the past threatened to pull him under. The new museum exhibit Valor and Sacrifice specifically featured a section on the brutal campaigns in the Ardennes, the very crucible where Arthur's youth had been forged and shattered. He'd read about it in a discarded newspaper, his heart thumping with a strange mixture of dread and desperate yearning curiosity. He needed to see it, to know if their story, the story of the boys who became men and then ghosts on those frozen hills, was told with truth, with honor, or if they too had been forgotten, dismissed like an old man and his dog at the gilded doors of memory. The museum bustled with weekend visitors, a cacophony of voices and shuffling feet echoing off the marble floors. Arthur, with Shadow pressed close, navigated the throng, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the Valor and Sacrifice exhibit. He clutched a small, worn pamphlet, its creases deep from repeated folding and unfolding. This was it. He timed his visit, hoping for a lull, but the crowd was dense. He could feel the familiar tightness in his chest, the precursor to cold sweat and the disorienting flood of fragmented images that sometimes ambushed him in crowded spaces. Shadow, ever vigilant, nudged. His hand, a gentle reminder to breathe. It was then that Mark, the security guard, spotted them. His eyes swept the crowd for infractions. A stray water bottle, a child too close to a velvet rope, narrowed on the dog. He moved with an officious stride, weaving through oblivious patrons, his expression hardening with every step. "Sir," Mark began, his voice already edged with impatience, "I'm afraid animals aren't permitted in the museum, especially not in the exhibit halls." Arthur startled and turned. "He's my service animal," he explained, his voice low, hoping to avoid a scene. He fumbled in his coat pocket and produced a laminated card, its edges frayed. "He's trained. He alerts me." Mark barely glanced at the card. "That may be so, sir, but we have a strict no-animals policy for the safety and comfort of our other patrons and the preservation of the artifacts." He gestured vaguely around. "Hair, dander, you understand?" A small nod. People had begun to notice the exchange. Their curiosity piqued. Arthur felt a flush creep up his neck. "But the law, service animals are permitted," he began, his voice faltering. He wasn't a man for confrontation. His battles had been fought long ago on different fields. Museum policy supersedes in this instance due to the sensitive nature of our collections, Mark stated. His tone brooked no argument. He sounded as if reciting from a manual, his eyes devoid of empathy. "He's very clean, very quiet," Arthur insisted, a note of desperation tinging his words. "He won't bother anyone. I need to see this exhibit." He gestured toward the archway, a silent plea in his eyes. "He won't go near any artifacts." Mark's jaw tightened. He was used to people trying to bend the rules, to argue. He saw an old man, perhaps a bit senile, in shabby clothes with a dog that, to his untrained eye, looked like any other pet. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to either secure your animal outside or leave the premises." His voice rose slightly, drawing more attention. A woman with a pearl necklace tutted audibly. A man in a crisp suit frowned in their direction. Arthur felt the weight of their stares, the familiar shame of being singled out, of being misunderstood. Shadow whimpered again, a low thrum of anxiety that mirrored Arthur's own. The air grew thick with unspoken judgment. The tension was palpable, coiling around Arthur like a vice. He could feel his breath catching, the old panic stirring. Shadow pressed harder against his leg, a silent, steadfast support. "Please," Arthur whispered, his gaze fixed on the poster. "For the exhibit, a dramatic depiction of silhouetted soldiers against a fiery sky. It's important." Mark's patience, already thin, snapped. He saw not a veteran seeking solace or connection, but an obstinate old man disrupting the smooth flow of the museum's operations, potentially inconveniencing the more important patrons he was paid. "To impress? Important?" Mark scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, this exhibit is about heroes, about soldiers who made real sacrifices. It's not a dog park. We have paying customers, families, people who want to appreciate history without distractions." He waved a dismissive hand toward Shadow. "Honestly, what could be so important to you in there that warrants all this fuss over a dog?" The insult, casual and cruel, struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He visibly recoiled, his face paling. His hand trembled slightly as it went to his chest, instinctively covering a small, worn leather pouch tucked inside his shirt, a pouch he always carried. It contained the only 2 dog tags he had kept were his own, and one belonging to a boy, who never made it off Hill 734. "Heroes?" Arthur whispered, his voice hollow. His eyes, normally cast downward, lifted to meet Mark's gaze, and for a brief moment the young guard caught a glimpse of something ancient and profound in them. A sorrow so immense it was almost terrifying. But the moment vanished, and Mark's expression hardened once more. "Look, I don't have all day. Are you leaving, or should I call for assistance to have you escorted out?" Nearby, a young woman named Sarah, a history undergraduate with bright, intelligent eyes, had been watching the interaction with growing unease. She clutched a notebook, her brow furrowed. She noticed the old man's quiet dignity, how his hand rested gently on the service dog, and the almost reverent way he looked towards the exhibit. Mark's dismissive tone and utter lack of compassion grated sharply against that dignity. Arthur, defeated, nodded slowly. The fight had left him. The effort needed to argue further, to plead his case against such rigid disdain, was more than he could muster. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and shuffled toward the exit, Shadow padding silently at his side, head low. Passing the entrance to the exhibit he had longed to see, he paused just a fraction of a second. "I just wanted to see," he muttered, almost inaudibly, "if they remembered us right, the sentinels, the silent sentinels of Hill 734. Sarah, the history student, possessed exceptionally keen hearing and an even keener interest in the forgotten details of old campaigns. The words "silent sentinels" and "Hill 734" lodged in her mind like barbs. Her own grandfather, a decorated but reserved veteran of the same war, had spoken sparingly about his experiences, but one name, one battle, had surfaced in his rare, unguarded moments: Hill 734. He had told tales of a near-mythical figure, a ghost sergeant who emerged from the chaos and smoke to rally a decimated platoon, leading a desperate defense that against all odds held the line and saved countless lives, including her grandfather's. Official histories were vague about specifics, attributing the success to uncommon valor and tenacious defense by unnamed elements. As Arthur Jenkins, dejected and humiliated, was being ushered toward the museum's grand front doors by the self-important Mark, Sarah felt a surge of indignant urgency. This couldn't be right. The old man's quiet sorrow, his precise mention of that hill and that unit, it was too much of a coincidence. She watched him leave, then acted on impulse, driven by a potent blend of academic curiosity and a deep, inherited respect for the sacrifices of that generation. She pulled out her smartphone, fingers flying across the screen as she typed "Silent Sentinels Hill 734 Veteran Liaison." The search results were sparse, but one name jumped out. Colonel Alistair Davies, listed as a contact for historical inquiries and veteran affairs related to the 101st Airborne Division's actions in that sector. There was a public affairs office number. Heart pounding, Sarah ducked into a quieter alcove and dialed, her mind racing. What would she say? A pleasant yet professional voice answered, "Public Affairs, Colonel Davies' office. How may I help?" "You?" Sarah took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah Knight," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a history student at the City Museum. There's an elderly gentleman here, a veteran, I think. He mentioned serving with the Silent Sentinels on Hill 734. He has a service dog, and the museum guard is—" Well, he's ejecting him. The veteran seems very distressed. He just wanted to see the exhibit on the war. She paused, then words tumbled out. "My grandfather served there. He always said someone from the Sentinels saved his life. This man, he has such a sad look in his eyes. I just felt I had to call. I don't know if it means anything." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment, then asked, "Can you describe the veteran, Miss Knight, and the guard?" Sarah gave a brief description. Arthur's worn coat, his quiet demeanor, Shadow, and Mark's officious attitude. She specifically mentioned Hill 734 and the Silent Sentinels. The voice responded with a new note of keen interest. "Yes. And the Silent Sentinels?" Sarah confirmed. "Yes." "Thank you, Miss Knight. Colonel Davies will be informed immediately." "Sandwich-boy-Tatum. You try to keep an eye on the veteran, if it's safe to do so, just until we can assess the situation." Sarah promised she would. A wave of profound relief washing over her, mixed with dawning apprehension. What had she just set in motion? Arthur sat on a cold stone bench outside the museum's grand entrance, the indifferent city roar a dull counterpoint to the turmoil in his chest. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, emitting soft, comforting sighs. The humiliation burned with a bitter taste in Arthur's mouth. It wasn't just the denial of entry, it was the casual stripping of dignity, the implication that he, and by extension, his silent companion, were nuisances unworthy of consideration. He reached into his shirt and touched the leather pouch inside. The cool metal of the dog tags was a familiar anchor. He had hoped to find a reflection of his past, perhaps a moment of quiet acknowledgement, not for himself, but for them, for Billy, for Smitty, for Henderson, for all the faces haunting his restless nights. Instead, he found only another closed door, another reminder of how easily the world forgot. He watched the museum doors as a stream of people flowed in and out, oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded. He wondered if the exhibit even mentioned Hill 734, or if it was just another sanitized heroic narrative glossing over the grit, the terror, and the impossible choices. Maybe it was better he hadn't gone in. Maybe some memories were best left undisturbed. Inside, Sarah hovered anxiously near the lobby, pretending to study a brochure while her eyes darted toward the entrance. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mark, the guard, had returned to his post, wearing an air of smug satisfaction. He'd handled the situation, enforced the rules, maintained order, even recounted a slightly embellished version of the incident to a passing colleague who chuckled appreciatively. Suddenly, a sleek black sedan, understated but clearly official, with small, discreet flags mounted on its fenders, pulled sharply to the curb, ignoring the no-stopping signs. A uniformed driver quickly emerged and opened the rear passenger door. From the vehicle stepped a man who commanded attention without uttering a word. Tall, his uniform immaculate, adorned with an array of ribbons and insignia that spoke of a long and distinguished career. This was Colonel Alistair Davies, his expression one of grim purpose. He moved with quiet, controlled urgency, eyes sharp and discerning as they swept the museum entrance. Sarah recognized him instantly from the single grainy photo she had seen online. Her breath caught in her throat. This was far more than she had anticipated. The colonel did not pause. He strode directly toward the main doors, his polished boots clicking decisively on the pavement. Mark, spotting the authoritative figure making a beeline for his domain, straightened up, a flicker of unease replacing his earlier smugness. He stepped forward, hand slightly raised. "Sir, can I help you?" "All visitors must enter through the main queue." His voice trailed off as Colonel Davies fixed him with a stare that could freeze fire. The colonel did not break stride. "I'm here to see the museum director immediately." His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable weight of command, a tone that brooked no argument and expected instant compliance. Mark, visibly flustered by the sheer, unadulterated authority radiating from the colonel, stammered, "The director, Miss Albright, is, do you have an appointment, sir?" The colonel's gaze remained locked on Mark, his expression unyielding. "My appointment is with a matter of grave disrespect shown to a United States veteran on these premises. Now, are you going to impede a United States Army colonel, or are you going to get your director?" The title, Colonel, hung in the air, heavy and significant. Mark's face, already losing color, turned an even paler shade. The nearby colleague who had chuckled earlier suddenly found something fascinating to study on the ceiling. Sarah, witnessing the exchange from her alcove, felt a thrill of vindication mixed with awe. She quickly stepped forward. "Colonel Davies?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. The colonel turned his piercing gaze to her. "Miss Knight?" "Yes, sir. The veteran, Mr. Jenkins. He's just outside on the bench to the left." She pointed. Colonel Davies gave a curt nod of acknowledgement to Sarah, a silent thank you. Then, without another word to the stunned Mark, he pivoted and strode out of the museum toward the indicated bench. Arthur looked up, startled, as the imposing, uniformed figure approached. He didn't recognize the rank or ribbons specifically. His world had been NCOs and mud-caked fatigues, but he recognized authority, the kind earned, not just worn. Shadow, sensing no threat, merely thumped his tail once on the pavement. Colonel Davies stopped a respectful distance from Arthur. His eyes, which had been hard and assessing, softened with an emotion Arthur hadn't seen directed at him in decades, profound, almost reverent respect. "Sergeant Arthur Jenkins?" the colonel asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Arthur blinked, confused. "Yes." "How did this officer know my name, my old rank?" Colonel Alistair Davies drew himself up to full height, his posture ramrod straight. Then, in a gesture that stunned Arthur to his core and sent ripples of shock through a few passers-by who witnessed it, snapped a crisp, impeccable salute. "Colonel Alistair Davies, sir," he said, his voice resonating with deeply held emotion. "It is an honor. My father, Captain Miles Davies, served under your command on Hill 734. A faint, respectful smile touched the colonel's lips. He served alongside the man they called the Ghost Sergeant, the man who saved his life and the lives of his entire platoon. Arthur stared, speechless, his mind reeling. Captain Miles Davies, a young, scared lieutenant then, brave but green, he remembered. Remembered pulling him from a burning foxhole. The world seemed to tilt. The museum director, Miss Eleanor Albright, a woman known for her composure and sharp business acumen, arrived in a flurry of apologies and concerned inquiries, alerted by a frantic call from a now thoroughly terrified Mark. She found Colonel Davies standing beside Arthur Jenkins on the bench, the colonel's hand resting gently on the older man's shoulder. Mark hovered in the background, looking like a schoolboy awaiting judgment. "Colonel Davies, Miss Albright," the colonel said, his voice still carrying that edge of steel, though his demeanor toward Arthur remained one of utmost deference. "This is Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars for Valor, and the Medal of Honor, all of which, I might add, he has consistently and humbly declined to wear or publicly acknowledge." Each medal named was like a hammer blow to Miss Albright's composure and Mark's rapidly crumbling self-importance. The Medal of Honor. The words hung in the air, almost sacred. Arthur flushed, looking down at his worn shoes, uncomfortable. With the recital of accolades, he felt he had not earned, but merely survived to receive. "Sergeant Jenkins," Colonel Davies continued, his gaze sweeping from Arthur to Miss Albright, and then deliberately isolating Mark, is one of the most decorated heroes of the Ardennes campaign. He is, quite literally, the silent sentinel your BEE exhibit claims to honor. He is the Ghost Sergeant of Hill 734, a legend murmured about by survivors across generations, the man who single-handedly repelled 3 enemy assaults after his officers were either killed or wounded. Rallying the terrified remnants of 2 platoons, he ensured that this critical position never fell. My own father would not have survived the war. I would not exist without this man's courage under unimaginable fire. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Today, his voice lowered, infused with quiet fury. He had been denied entry to an exhibit about his own sacrifices, insulted, dismissed, and ordered off the premises by your staff, all because of his legally recognized service animal, Shadow, a companion he depends on due to the very hell he endured fighting for the freedoms this museum supposedly celebrates. Miss Albright looked horrified. Her eyes darted from the colonel's thunderous expression to Arthur's quietly bewildered face, then to Mark, who seemed to shrink beneath. Her gaze, I had no idea," she stammered, her professional poise shattered. "Guard Miller, is this true? You turned this gentleman away?" Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Ma'am, the policy, no animals. I didn't know." "He just looked like—" He trailed off, unable to speak the judgment he had so easily passed moments before. He had only seen an old man who didn't seem important. Colonel Davies finished his sentence for him, his tone scathing. "Perhaps you should be reminded that heroes don't always wear their valor visibly, young man. Sometimes it's etched into their souls, carried in the quiet dignity of their bearing, and supported by the unwavering loyalty of a dog, like Shadow." He gestured to the worn leather pouch Arthur still clutched. "I'd wager that pouch contains more history and sacrifice than half the display cases in this building." Arthur finally lifted his gaze, a flicker of something neither pride nor bitterness, but weary acceptance in his eyes. He met Miss Albright's eyes. "I just wanted to see," he said softly, "if they got the story right." The air crackled with unspoken recriminations and dawning shame. Miss Albright, a seasoned professional, quickly grasped the gravity of the situation, not just the disrespect shown to a highly decorated veteran, but also the looming public relations nightmare for the museum. More than that, a genuine sense of mortification settled over her. Her institution, dedicated to preserving history and honoring sacrifice, had made a grievous error at its very doorstep. "Sergeant Jenkins," she said, her voice filled with sincere regret as she turned fully toward Arthur, "on behalf of the City Museum, I offer our most profound and unreserved apologies. There is no excuse for what happened here today. None whatsoever." She then turned to Mark, her expression stern. "Mr. Miller, your actions not only violated the spirit of this institution, but also demonstrated a shocking lack of judgment and compassion. We will be reviewing your conduct and revising our policies regarding service animals immediately to ensure this never happens again." Mark stood rigid, his face ashen. He looked at Arthur, truly looked at him, for the first time not as an inconvenience, but as the man Colonel Davies had described. A wave of shame, so powerful it was almost nauseating, washed over him. "Sir," he managed, his voice barely a croak, directing his words to Arthur, I am so sorry. I was wrong, terribly wrong." Arthur, a man who had faced death and unimaginable horrors, simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgment rather than absolution. He was not a man to hold grudges. Life had taught him they were too heavy a burden to carry. Colonel Davies, however, was not yet finished. "Miss Albright," he said, his tone still firm, "Sergeant Jenkins mentioned wanting to verify if the exhibit got the story right. Frankly, I have heard concerns from other veterans of the 101st about certain interpretations and omissions in the Valor and Sacrifice display, particularly regarding the Ardennes section. Given what has transpired, and out of respect for true heroes like Sergeant Jenkins, I strongly suggest the exhibit be temporarily closed for a thorough curatorial review. Perhaps," he added, looking pointedly at Arthur, "with input from someone who was actually there, someone whose experiences are an invaluable primary source." Miss Albright did not hesitate. The Colonel's suggestion was both a command and a lifeline. "Of course, Colonel, absolutely. Sergeant Jenkins, if you would be willing, we would be honored to have your guidance in reviewing the exhibit's content. And please allow me to personally escort you through it now as our guest of honor, you and Shadow." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Arthur's lips. He looked at Shadow, who wagged his tail gently, then back at the director. "Thank you, ma'am. I'd like that." The great bronze doors of the museum, which had seemed insurmountable moments before, now felt as if they were opening, not just to an exhibit, but to a measure of peace Arthur Jenkins hadn't realized he'd been seeking for over half a century. The decision was swift. The Valor and Sacrifice exhibit was declared temporarily closed to the public for an essential curatorial review, to ensure historical accuracy and to offer fuller tribute to the extraordinary individuals it aims to honor. The news of the incident, though initially confined to the museum's upper levels, began to spread. Sarah Knight, a history student, found herself giving a statement to a very interested Miss Albright, who promised her a letter of commendation and a possible internship. Markey Miller was suspended pending a full review and mandatory sensitivity training. His career as a museum guard was irrevocably changed by his brief, disastrous encounter with quiet heroism. For Arthur Jenkins, however, the world had subtly shifted. Accompanied by Miss Albright, Colonel Davies, and with Shadow faithfully pacing. By his side, he walked through the now empty halls of the Valor and Sacrifice exhibit. He moved slowly, his gaze lingering on photographs, maps, and display cases filled with artifacts. He paused longest, before a large mural depicting a brutal forest battle, smoke and fire obscuring the faces of soldiers. "This part," he said, softly pointing to a section of the Ardennes map. "Hill 734. It was colder than they show, and the trees offered little cover." He spoke not of heroism, but of the biting wind, gnawing hunger, and sheer unending exhaustion. He spoke of the names of boys who never came home. Miss Albright listened intently, notepad in hand, her earlier distress replaced by a profound, humbling respect. Colonel Davies stood silently nearby, pride in Arthur palpable. They spent hours in the exhibit. Arthur identified inaccuracies, not with anger, but with gentle insistence on truth. He pointed out where a particular unit had been misrepresented, corrected the type of equipment shown, and most poignantly, provided names for some of the blurred faces in archival photographs, young men full of life, frozen in time, their stories untold until now. He spoke of their courage, their fears, their camaraderie. He did not speak of his own Medal of Honor actions until Colonel Davies gently prompted him, and even then Arthur's account was sparse, focusing on the collective effort, the shared desperation, and the luck that had allowed him to survive, when so many others had not. The experience was cathartic, a lancing of a wound long festering. When they finally emerged, Arthur seemed lighter, his stooped shoulders a little less burdened. Miss Albright assured him that his insights would be integral to the exhibit's revision. She offered him a lifetime pass to the museum and expressed her hope that he would become a regular consultant. Colonel Davies arranged for a car to take Arthur and Shadow home, but not before shaking Arthur's hand with warmth and respect that brought a rare tear to the veteran's eye. The young officer, once dismissed and belittled, had been truly seen, perhaps for the first time in decades. The fallout from that day at the museum was significant. Sergeant Arthur Jenkins was vindicated, his dignity restored tenfold. The Valor and Sacrifice exhibit reopened a month later, substantially revised, with a new plaque at its entrance dedicated to Sergeant Arthur Jenkins and the Silent Sentinels of Hill 734, whose true valor reminds us that heroism often walks quietly among us. Mark Miller, after completing his training, was reassigned to a non-public facing role. He also began volunteering at a local Veterans Support Center, a changed young man, now acutely aware of the unseen battles fought by those around him. Miss Albright instituted comprehensive new training programs for all museum staff, emphasizing empathy, respect for veterans, and proper understanding of service animal accommodations. The story, discreetly leaked by an intern in Colonel Davies' office to a local reporter known for human interest stories, became a quiet sensation, a poignant reminder in a world quick to judge by appearances. It underscored the enduring truth that true heroism isn't about the uniform you wear today, but the sacrifices you made yesterday, and that respect is a debt owed to all, especially those who have given so much and asked for so little. The quiet courage of Arthur Jenkins, his unassuming demeanor masking an extraordinary past, served as a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones, for they may carry the weight of history and the spirit of true valor within them. His story, and Shadow's unwavering loyalty, became a beacon illuminating the often overlooked dignity of our elderly veterans and the critical importance of treating every individual with the respect they inherently deserve. One late afternoon, weeks after the exhibit reopened, Arthur Jenkins stood before it once more, Shadow by his side. This time, there were no barriers, only quiet nods of recognition from the museum staff. He looked at a newly added photograph, a grainy image of a young, determined sergeant himself, surrounded by his men on a snow-covered hill. A single tear traced down his weathered cheek, a tear not of sorrow, but of peace, remembrance, of finally being home. He had only wanted to see if they remembered. Now he knew they would. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more stories that honor the quiet heroes and remind us of the profound impact of respect. Type honor in the comments if you believe every story of sacrifice deserves to be heard and every veteran treated with the dignity they have earned.